Our first fact begins with the moment Starcraft entered the gaming world. Starcraft was officially released on March 31, 1998, by the game developer Blizzard Entertainment. At the time, real-time strategy games were already popular, but few people could have predicted just how influential this particular game would become. Players around the world installed the game from CDs, loaded it onto their computers, and suddenly found themselves commanding armies across distant planets. Later that same year, an expansion called Brood War would arrive, adding even more units, missions, and strategies. Even decades later, many players still remember the feeling of hearing the game start for the first time, the music quietly beginning, and the universe of Starcraft opening up before them. And that leads us to our second fact. One of the reasons Starcraft became so beloved is because it featured three completely unique factions. These were the Terran, the Zerg, and the Protoss. The Terran represent humanity. Their technology is rugged and industrial, often looking like heavy machinery designed to survive harsh environments. Terran units rely on adaptability, mobility, and clever tactics. The Zerg are something entirely different. They are a terrifying biological swarm made up of countless alien organisms that function together almost like a single living entity. Their strength lies in numbers and rapid evolution. And then there are the Protoss. Ancient, mysterious, and incredibly advanced, the Protoss rely on powerful technology and psionic abilities. Their units tend to be fewer in number, but extremely powerful. The careful balance between these three races created one of the deepest strategic systems ever seen in a strategy game. Now, our third fact focuses on something many players noticed right away: the artificial intelligence. For its time, Starcraft's computer opponents were surprisingly challenging. Instead of simply following predictable patterns, the game's AI could build bases, expand its economy, and attack in ways that felt surprisingly dynamic. Players might find themselves defending against sudden enemy pushes, scouting hidden expansions, or adapting to unexpected strategies. This made even single-player matches feel exciting and unpredictable. Moving on to our fourth fact, we arrive at one of the most memorable aspects of Starcraft: its story. Unlike many strategy games of the time, Starcraft told a long and complex science fiction narrative. The story followed political struggles, betrayals, alliances, and wars across multiple planets. Some of the most famous characters in the story include the space marshal Jim Raynor, the powerful psychic operative Sarah Kerrigan, and the noble Protoss commander Tassadar. Over the course of the campaign, players would see these characters face difficult choices, shifting loyalties, and dramatic moments that helped make Starcraft feel more like an unfolding space epic than a simple strategy game. Our fifth fact brings us to something that changed gaming forever. Starcraft became one of the earliest and most influential esports games in the world. In particular, the game exploded in popularity in the country of South Korea. Professional players began competing in televised tournaments. Entire leagues were formed, and matches were broadcast on television for millions of viewers. Crowds gathered to watch players control armies with incredible speed and precision, sometimes performing hundreds of actions per minute. Even today, many historians of competitive gaming point to Starcraft as one of the foundations of modern esports. Now for our sixth fact. One feature that quietly helped Starcraft remain popular for many years was its powerful map editor. The game included tools that allowed players to design their own battlefields. But creative fans quickly realized they could do far more than that. They began creating entirely new game modes, custom missions, puzzle maps, and even early versions of genres that would later become famous. Some of the earliest tower defense games and hero-based maps actually began as Starcraft custom maps made by players experimenting with the editor. This creativity kept the community active long after the original campaign had been completed. Our seventh fact explores the design philosophy behind the game's units. Unlike many strategy games where factions feel somewhat similar, Starcraft deliberately made each race dramatically different. Terran forces rely on flexible units and defensive structures. Zerg armies can produce large numbers of creatures very quickly. Protoss units are fewer but extremely powerful, often protected by energy shields. Because of these differences, players had to learn entirely different strategies depending on which race they controlled, or which race they were fighting against. Our eighth fact looks at Starcraft's wider influence. Many game designers consider Starcraft to be one of the most important real-time strategy games ever created. Its careful balance between the three races, its fast-paced gameplay, and its strong multiplayer systems helped shape the design of many future strategy games. Developers studying Starcraft often used it as a model for how to create asymmetric gameplay that still remains balanced and competitive. Our ninth fact involves something that may seem small today, but was a major issue in the late 1990s. Starcraft originally used a CD key system for copy protection. When players installed the game, they needed to enter a unique code printed inside the game box. However, people quickly began sharing these codes with friends, which made it easier to install the game on multiple computers. In response to this, Blizzard expanded its online service, allowing players to connect through an online network called Battle.net. This system eventually became one of the most important online gaming platforms of its time. And finally, our 10th fact looks at the cultural impact of Starcraft. Over the years, many phrases spoken by units in the game became instantly recognizable to players. Lines like Terran reporting, or the Protoss battle cry, for ire, became iconic parts of gaming culture. These small voice lines, repeated thousands of times during matches, became part of the shared memory of an entire generation of players. And even now, decades after its original release, Starcraft continues to be remembered not just as a game, but as a world filled with stories, strategies, and unforgettable moments. And with that, we'll gently move forward, into the next set of facts, as our quiet journey through the universe of Starcraft continues. As we continue our slow journey through the universe of Starcraft, we arrive at another set of quiet details that help shape the experience players remember today. Our next fact focuses on something that fundamentally changed the way players gathered information during a match, the fog of war. In Starcraft, players cannot see the entire map all at once. Instead, large portions of the battlefield remain hidden unless explored by their units. This system, known as the fog of war, creates an atmosphere of uncertainty and discovery. When a unit travels across the map, it briefly reveals the terrain around it. But once that unit leaves, enemy movements can again disappear into the shadows. Because of this, scouting becomes an essential part of strategy. Players send small units across the map, quietly searching for clues about what their opponent might be planning. Is the enemy building a large army? Expanding to another base? Preparing a surprise attack? The fog of war transforms every match into a kind of mystery, where knowledge must be carefully gathered, and assumptions can sometimes lead to unexpected surprises. Our 12th fact takes us into the campaign itself. Starcraft offered players several difficulty levels when starting the story missions. These ranged from easier settings for new players, all the way to much more challenging difficulties that required careful planning and precise control. What made this particularly interesting was that some missions contained hidden challenges or subtle differences depending on the difficulty selected. Players who returned to the campaign later sometimes discovered new strategies, secret objectives, or simply a much tougher battlefield waiting for them. This gradual increase in challenge helped players slowly learn the mechanics of the game, almost like a quiet training process unfolding mission by mission. Now we move to our 13th fact, which highlights something that helped Starcraft feel surprisingly alive for a game released in the late 1990s. Starcraft featured extensive voice acting for both its story characters and its individual units. When players selected units, those characters would respond with short voice lines. Marines would acknowledge orders. Protoss warriors would speak with calm authority, and Zerg creatures would make strange alien sounds. At the time, having such a large amount of voice acting in a strategy game was still relatively uncommon. It helped give personality to the armies players controlled, making them feel less like abstract units and more like characters inhabiting a living universe. Our 14th fact shifts toward the economy of the game. In Starcraft, two main resources power every army and structure: minerals and Vespene gas. Minerals are typically gathered from bright crystal formations scattered across the map. Worker units carry these resources back to the player's base, slowly building the economic foundation needed for expansion. Vespene gas, on the other hand, is collected from special geysers using dedicated structures. Gas is usually required for advanced technology, powerful units, and specialized upgrades. Because of this system, players must constantly balance their economy. Gathering minerals allows them to produce basic units and structures, while collecting gas unlocks the more sophisticated parts of their technology tree. Managing these resources efficiently often becomes the quiet rhythm behind every match. Our 15th fact brings us to the terrain itself. Starcraft's maps are more than simple battlefields. The landscape shapes strategy in subtle but important ways. Certain units interact with the terrain differently. For example, the Zerg spread a living substance known as creep across the ground. This strange organic layer allows many Zerg units to move slightly faster. Air units, meanwhile, can ignore most terrain obstacles entirely, floating above cliffs, water, and other barriers. But air units often come with their own vulnerabilities, requiring players to carefully balance aerial power with ground defenses. This constant interaction between units and terrain adds another quiet layer of strategy beneath the surface of the game. Our 16th fact explores a feature that sometimes led to dramatic moments in multiplayer matches. Unlike some other strategy games of its era, Starcraft did not impose a strict cap on how many air units players could produce. As long as players had the resources and supply capacity, they could continue building large aerial fleets. This sometimes led to massive battles in the skies, where dozens of flying units clashed in spectacular formations above the battlefield. These moments often became unforgettable highlights for players watching competitive matches. Now we come to our 17th fact, which introduces a particularly unusual Zerg structure. The Zerg possess a biological transport system known as the Nidus Canal. This strange organic tunnel allows Zerg units to instantly travel between two distant points on the map. Once the canal is established, units can enter one opening and emerge from another location almost immediately. This mechanic opens the door for surprising strategies. A Zerg player might quietly build a canal near an enemy base, and suddenly unleash a swarm of creatures from beneath the ground. For opponents who are not watching carefully, the result can be a sudden and unexpected invasion. Our 18th fact concerns the infrastructure of the Protoss. Unlike Terran buildings, which can be placed almost anywhere, Protoss structures require a source of power. This power is generated by a structure called the pylon. Each pylon creates a field of energy around it, and most Protoss buildings must be constructed within that field. If the pylon is destroyed, nearby buildings may temporarily lose power. This small design choice introduces an interesting vulnerability. Opponents who carefully target pylons can disrupt an entire section of a Protoss base. As a result, Protoss players must think carefully about where they place these important structures. Our 19th fact takes us beyond gaming and into the world of scientific research. Because Starcraft is such a complex strategic environment, researchers studying artificial intelligence have used the game as a testing ground for machine learning. One famous project involved an advanced AI system developed by DeepMind called AlphaStar. Programs like this attempt to learn strategies, adapt to opponents, and manage large numbers of decisions at once, much like human players. In this way, a strategy game from the late 1990s eventually became a tool for exploring the future of artificial intelligence. And finally, our 20th fact returns to something many players experimented with just for fun. Starcraft includes a collection of hidden cheat codes. By typing special phrases during a game, players could unlock unusual effects. One famous code, Power Overwhelming, granted near invincibility to the player's units. Other codes revealed the entire map, provided extra resources, or allowed players to instantly build structures. For many players, these cheat codes became a playful way to explore the game after completing the campaign, experimenting with unusual scenarios and watching enormous battles unfold. And so, with 20 facts now explored, our quiet journey through the universe of Starcraft continues. Ahead of us still lie more stories from the game's development, its hidden quirks, and the fascinating details that helped make this classic strategy game so memorable. So as we move forward, let the calm rhythm of these stories continue, as we drift gently into the next chapter of facts. As our quiet journey through the history and design of Starcraft continues, we now move into some of the more unusual and behind-the-scenes details from the game's development. Many of these facts reveal how the game slowly evolved during its creation, sometimes changing in unexpected ways before finally becoming the classic players know today. Our 21st fact takes us all the way back to the early stages of development. Before the game was officially named Starcraft, the project briefly carried a different working title, Warcraft, Orions. At the time, developers at Blizzard Entertainment were experimenting with the idea of adapting their fantasy strategy engine into a science fiction setting. Because of this connection, the early concept borrowed elements from the existing Warcraft technology. As development continued, however, the project slowly grew into something entirely new. The designers realized they were creating a much larger and more ambitious universe, one that deserved its own identity. Eventually, the name Starcraft was chosen, and a new science fiction world began to take shape. Our 22nd fact reveals that not every unit created during development actually made it into the final game. Like many complex strategy games, Starcraft went through many iterations while developers tested balance and gameplay. Several units were designed, prototyped, and even partially implemented, only to be removed later. Among these were experimental concepts such as the Terran, Shrike, and a strange Zerg structure sometimes referred to as a broodling turret. These units were eventually scrapped because they disrupted the balance between the three races, or simply didn't fit the final design direction. Even so, these forgotten ideas remain an interesting glimpse into the creative process behind the game. Now we come to our 23rd fact, which highlights a small but fascinating detail about the game's sound design. Some audio elements in Starcraft were actually adapted from an earlier Blizzard game, Warcraft II, Tides of Darkness. Rather than creating every sound entirely from scratch, developers occasionally reused and modified existing effects. Certain Terran unit sounds, for example, were heavily edited versions of audio originally recorded for Warcraft soldiers. Through careful editing and sound design, these reused clips were transformed into something that felt completely new. For most players, the connection was nearly impossible to notice, but it quietly shows how game development often builds on previous work. Our 24th fact brings us to one of the most important characters in the entire Starcraft story. During early development, the character Sarah Kerrigan was originally planned to appear already fully transformed by the alien Zerg. However, the story was later changed in a very significant way. Instead of starting as a Zerg creature, Kerrigan would begin the story as a human operative working within the Terran forces. This allowed the narrative to slowly build toward her eventual transformation, creating one of the most dramatic plot twists in the game's storyline. For many players, this shift made Kerrigan one of the most memorable and complex characters in the entire series. Our 25th fact explores an interesting quirk hidden deep within the game's movement system. Although the world of Starcraft appears smooth and continuous, units actually move along an invisible square grid beneath the surface. Because of this grid system, diagonal movement can sometimes behave in slightly unusual ways. Units may take odd paths or reposition themselves in ways that feel a little unexpected. Over time, highly skilled players discovered ways to use this behavior to their advantage. These subtle movement quirks became part of advanced strategies known as micromanagement, where players control individual units with extreme precision. Our 26th fact involves the size of the maps themselves. Official Starcraft maps were typically limited to a maximum size of 128 by 128 tiles. This was partly due to technical limitations of the game engine and the computers of the late 1990s. However, creative players quickly began experimenting with the game's files. By editing map data manually, modders discovered ways to push the engine beyond its intended limits, creating much larger battlefields than the game normally allowed. These experimental maps sometimes behaved unpredictably, but they demonstrated just how inventive the Starcraft community could be. Now we arrive at our 27th fact, which touches on a visual element that gave the Zerg their distinctive personality. When Zerg units are destroyed, they often leave behind dramatic and sometimes rather gory death animations. Limbs scatter, creatures collapse into strange biological remains, and the battlefield briefly reflects the chaotic nature of the alien swarm. At the time of release, these animations were slightly controversial due to their intensity. But many players also praised them for giving the Zerg a strong identity. The exaggerated effects made battles feel more dramatic and emphasized the strange biological nature of the swarm. Our 28th fact involves hidden challenges scattered throughout the game. Certain campaign missions include unusual conditions or secret ways of completing objectives. For example, some players experimented with completing missions without building certain types of units, or by achieving objectives in unexpected ways. These self-imposed challenges weren't always officially recognized by the game itself, but they became part of the community's creative exploration. Players shared strategies online, discussing strange or clever ways to complete missions that the developers might never have originally imagined. Our 29th fact explores something many players never notice unless they compare different versions of the game. Starcraft was translated into multiple languages for release around the world. During this localization process, some unit names and voice lines were slightly adjusted to better fit cultural expectations or language structures. Because of these changes, players in different regions occasionally used different terminology when discussing strategies. It's a small detail, but it shows how a global game can quietly adapt to many different cultures and languages. And now we arrive at our 30th fact. One of the most important technological foundations of Starcraft was its online multiplayer service, known as Battle.net. Battle.net allowed players from around the world to connect online, create matches, and compete against each other. At the time, large-scale online gaming systems were still relatively new. But Battle.net provided matchmaking, chat systems, and organized multiplayer lobbies that made it easy for players to gather and compete. Over time, this platform became one of the central hubs of the Starcraft community. It helped connect players across continents, laid the groundwork for organized competition, and ultimately helped transform Starcraft into one of the earliest global esports. And with 30 facts now explored, our calm journey through the world of Starcraft continues. There are still more quiet details ahead, from hidden mechanics and unusual design decisions, to the creative experiments that shaped the game behind the scenes. So as the story continues, simply relax, let the rhythm of these small discoveries carry you along, and drift gently into the next chapter. As we continue our slow and relaxing journey through the world of Starcraft, we arrive at another collection of small but fascinating details that help shape the experience players remember today. Our 31st fact returns to the subject of terrain, and how the battlefield itself influences strategy. In Starcraft, the map is more than just a place where armies move. Different terrain features subtly change how units behave and how players plan their strategies. For example, cliffs create areas of high ground. Units positioned on higher terrain can sometimes see farther, giving them a strategic advantage over enemies below. Ramps become natural choke points where smaller defensive forces can hold off larger armies. And creep-covered areas, which spread from Zerg structures, provide movement advantages for many Zerg units. These terrain features encourage careful positioning and thoughtful planning, turning every battlefield into a strategic puzzle waiting to be solved. Our 32nd fact explores one of the more advanced features hidden inside Starcraft's map editor. Not only could players create custom maps, but they could also design custom artificial intelligence scripts. These scripts allowed map creators to control how enemy forces behaved during a mission. Instead of using the standard AI routines, custom scripts could trigger special events, launch coordinated attacks, or even create story-driven encounters. This flexibility allowed creative fans to design entirely new gameplay experiences, transforming Starcraft from a simple strategy game into a platform for endless experimentation. Our 33rd fact looks at the flow of resources during longer matches. Technically, Starcraft does not place a hard cap on how many minerals or gas resources players can collect. However, resource fields eventually run dry if harvested for long enough. Because of this, players must constantly search for new areas of the map to expand their bases. Expansion becomes one of the central strategic goals of any match. Controlling more bases means gathering more resources, which allows players to build larger armies and maintain pressure on their opponents. This system encourages players to spread across the map rather than remaining in a single fortified location. Now we arrive at our 34th fact, which introduces one of the most unusual reconnaissance units in the game. The Protoss possess a small floating unit known as the Observer. Observers are permanently cloaked, meaning they remain invisible to most enemy units unless detected by specialized technology. Because of this, they serve as perfect scouts. Players can quietly move observers across the battlefield, watching enemy movements without being seen. They often hover silently above enemy bases, gathering valuable information that can shape the course of a match. In the hands of a skilled player, information gathered by observers can become just as powerful as an entire army. Our 35th fact takes us into the cinematic presentation of Starcraft's story. During the late 1990s, many games relied on simple in-game graphics to tell their stories. But Starcraft went a step further. Several key moments in the campaign were presented through pre-rendered cinematic sequences. These scenes used detailed 3D animation to show dramatic moments in the storyline. Characters spoke, starships moved across space, and entire battles unfolded in cinematic detail. At the time, these sequences felt incredibly advanced and helped make the story feel larger and more immersive. Our 36th fact explores one of the most unique mechanics belonging to the Zerg. Unlike Terran and Protoss units, which are usually built separately from production structures, many Zerg units evolve or morph into new forms. For example, a Zerg creature might transform into a more advanced organism rather than being produced entirely from scratch. This biological evolution system reinforces the theme of the Zerg as a constantly adapting swarm, growing and changing as it spreads across the battlefield. Now we reach our 37th fact, which involves a simple but clever defensive structure used by the Terran. The supply depot is normally just a building used to support a player's army capacity. However, in certain versions of the game and its later updates, these structures could raise or lower sections to allow units to pass. This allowed Terran players to create controlled entrances to their bases. By lowering the depot, friendly units could move through. By raising it again, the entrance would close, blocking enemy ground forces. This small mechanic became an elegant way to manage defenses and protect vulnerable bases. Our 38th fact takes us to the expansion that dramatically reshaped the game. Later in 1998, Starcraft received a major expansion called Starcraft, Brood War. Brood War added 12 entirely new units across the three races. These new additions changed the balance of the game and opened the door for many new strategies. Some of the most famous competitive strategies in Starcraft history only became possible after the arrival of these new units. Even today, many fans consider Brood War one of the greatest expansion packs ever released for a strategy game. Our 39th fact reveals a quiet detail hidden deep inside the game's files. Within the Starcraft installation, there are music tracks that were never used during normal gameplay. These hidden or experimental pieces of music can sometimes be accessed through custom maps or special modifications. They offer a small glimpse into the creative experimentation that took place during development, when composers and designers were exploring different moods and tones for the game. And finally, our 40th fact returns us to the online world of competition. Starcraft featured an early multiplayer ladder system through Battle.net. This system tracked player rankings and matched competitors against opponents of similar skill levels. While the system seems normal today, it was a significant innovation at the time. It helped encourage fair competition and allowed players to measure their improvement over time. For many players, climbing the ladder became its own quiet challenge, a journey of practice, strategy, and patience. And with 40 facts now behind us, we continue gently onward, toward the final chapter of our exploration. We now arrive at the final segment of our calm exploration through the world of Starcraft. Our 41st fact focuses on the voices that helped bring the characters of Starcraft to life. While many modern games rely on large casts of professional actors, some of the voices in Starcraft were actually provided by members of the development team themselves. One notable example is the voice of Jim Raynor, performed by Robert Clotworthy. His calm, rugged performance helped define the personality of Raynor and became one of the most recognizable voices in the game. Our 42nd fact looks at one of the most powerful units in the Terran arsenal. The siege tank is famous for its devastating siege mode, capable of launching powerful long-range attacks across the battlefield. However, during early development, the unit was planned to have a more complicated design with different weapons depending on its mode. Eventually, the developers simplified the concept into the two-mode system players know today, mobile tank mode, and stationary siege mode. This change helped keep the unit powerful while still remaining manageable within the fast pace of the game. Our 43rd fact brings us back to the Zerg and the strange organic substance known as creep. Creep slowly spreads outward from Zerg structures such as hatcheries and creep colonies. This living surface allows Zerg buildings to be constructed and also provides movement advantages for certain Zerg units. Because creep spreads gradually across the battlefield, controlling territory becomes a biological process for the Zerg swarm, slowly transforming the map itself. Our 44th fact concerns the energy system used by the Protoss. Most Protoss structures must be built within the power field generated by pylons. This concept would later inspire mechanics in many other games, where certain structures or units require an energy network or connection system. The idea of buildings depending on a shared power source introduced interesting strategic vulnerabilities, but also allowed the Protoss to maintain their identity as a technologically advanced civilization. Our 45th fact reveals a small and playful detail hidden inside some early multiplayer maps. In certain cases, map creators secretly placed hidden messages within the map tiles themselves. These messages were invisible during normal gameplay, but curious players exploring the map files sometimes discovered them. They served as tiny Easter eggs left behind by designers or map creators, quiet signatures hidden within the game world. Our 46th fact returns to the campaign and its carefully designed learning curve. Rather than overwhelming players with every mechanic at once, the campaign slowly introduced new units and abilities over time. Early missions focused on basic control and resource management. Later missions gradually added more complex units, new technologies, and more difficult objectives. This gradual structure allowed players to learn the game naturally, almost without realizing they were mastering increasingly advanced strategies. Our 47th fact highlights another interesting feature of Starcraft's online systems. Through Battle.net, the game tracked which custom maps were most frequently played by the community. This data helped identify popular game modes and allowed certain maps to rise to prominence within the player base. Over time, some custom maps became almost as famous as the original game itself. Our 48th fact returns once more to the Zerg. Many Zerg units possess the ability to burrow beneath the ground. When burrowed, these creatures become hidden from normal sight, allowing them to ambush enemy forces or avoid detection. Players who mastered this mechanic could stage clever traps, suddenly revealing hidden units at just the right moment during battle. Our 49th fact introduces one of the Terran's stealth specialists. Terran ghost units possess a cloaking ability that allows them to temporarily become invisible. While cloaked, they consume energy, which means the ability must be used carefully. This mechanic adds another layer of micromanagement and stealth tactics to the game, rewarding players who carefully manage their unit's abilities. And now we arrive at our 50th and final fact. During the early concept phase of Starcraft, artists created many experimental designs for units and creatures that never appeared in the final game. Some of these designs included radically different versions of Protoss ships or unusual Zerg creatures with tentacle-like wings. Although these ideas were eventually abandoned, they show just how much experimentation occurred while building the Starcraft universe. Many of these pieces of concept art can still be found in art books and developer archives, offering a fascinating glimpse into the creative process behind the game. And so, after exploring 50 calm and curious facts, our journey through the history and design of Starcraft slowly comes to a close. From its early development ideas, to its competitive scene, to the tiny hidden details scattered throughout the game, Starcraft remains one of the most influential strategy games ever created. But for now, as this quiet exploration comes to an end, you can simply relax, let the stories fade into the background, and drift peacefully into sleep among distant stars and quiet galaxies. Thank you for joining me on this galactic trip through some facts about Starcraft, one of the most iconic video games of all time. Be sure to check out our video on the sequel, Starcraft 2. Also, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Until next time.